Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Storytime video. This is going to be either the last or second to last one until we start allowing people to actually view what will eventually become the series. And what I mean by that, and I made a video about it, I'll put it in the description if you want to get into more information there. But basically, anyone who has and is going to support us on Patreon will get a private invite to sit in on our games coming up here shortly, and then that will continue until we launch the series. Well, what it basically entails is you joining our Discord and listening to us play. You'll have your own text channel to talk about what's going on. We're not going to be like streaming it live. You'll just actually be there with us in the game. So you'll have to have a Roll20 account, which is free, and we'll invite you to Roll20 where you can see like the character sheets that I'll have set up for anyone who's viewing. We won't have any of the production stuff, so none of the like cameras or anything like that, but you will be able to sit in on the game and see it genuinely played, which will be really fun. And you'll also get an idea of kind of what the series will be like. Obviously, we'll ham it up a bit more when we launch the series, but you'll get a genuine idea. And at the same time, you'll also be able to provide feedback and have a Q&A and stuff at the end of every game. So that way we can kind of change things as we need them before we launch the series. So anyone who's been supporting us on Patreon or will get that. So if you are interested in that and you've been listening to these, go to patreon.com/OSWguild, and then you can get in kind of on the ground floor of that and see all this crazy stuff happen, because it is about to get really crazy. We have been playing while I've been doing the Storytime videos, and we were trying to catch up on the Dathomir story for you guys, but they've been on Ord Mantell doing stuff. So let's just jump right back into the story where we left off, which is the players jumped onto their ship, left Dathomir, and they have the Saphira hunters on board. They also have Cookie's father on board, who they've put in the basically the infirmary on the ship. And Doc is trying to take care of him, and Cookie is over there. Meanwhile, Alask and the rest of the crew have just kind of walked in and seen the Saphira hunters. Then they look happy to see the players. They're like, "Oh, I'm glad you guys are safe," but at the same time, they seem to have made themselves at home fairly quickly. In fact, one of them's like drinking tea, just like in their little lobby area on their ship, kind of like where you see the chess, the space chess in the movies on the Millennium Falcon. That's pretty much exactly where this is on their ship, because their ship is also a Millennium Falcon type ship, the YT 1300 cruiser. So there's like 4 Saphira hunters in there, and they're all just kind of hanging out, relaxing. One of them's drinking tea, and they're like, the player's like, "Oh wait, how did you? Wait, like, who are you guys exactly?" And they're just like super chill about it, and they say that they're really happy that the players are safe, and the players pretty much have a conversation like, "Where do you guys want to go?" And they're like, "Wherever you're going, we'll go." And they mention that they're probably going back to Ord Mantell. The Saphira hunters say that that's great because Caitlin is there. They'll be able to talk with her and everything. So the plan is made, but upon getting into the cockpit of the ship, they see that there are 2 messages waiting for them. And the first is from Vex. Now, Vex is the huntsmaster for the Great Hunt, for this in particular party, the Void Ghost. And they have this message pretty much stating who their next target will be in the next phase of the Great Hunt, because they have made it to the semifinals. And the specific rules for these, for this semifinal in particular, is that they're not going against another hunter. It's just a very dangerous bounty. So they, start listening in, and they start gathering information on this, because it's a recorded message. It's not like they can reply directly to her as she's talking. And what she says is that their next target is Dalton Oswin. So let's back that up, because that's a pretty big name in our game thus far. You see, the Shadow Collective is a organization of criminals that, you see it in the Clone Wars and even in Rebels a bit, but it was basically started by Darth Maul. and the Night Brothers, and they invited the Death Watch, where they're kind of like a rogue group of Mandalorians in. They also invited the Hutts. The Hutts are a part of it. So are the Night Sisters, but the Night Sisters and the Night Brothers are kind of one and the same. And then there is the Black Sun, which is a name that a lot of people know because it's kind of like the mob or a mob of the galaxy. They're really dangerous, and they like taking over planets and converting them to like a way of crime. So that's kind of the organizations involved in the Shadow Collective, and Dalton Oswin is a character that I've made to be the head of said Shadow Collective. And the players earlier on in the game, like much earlier on before they really started getting into the Great Hunt, it was kind of when they first got to Ord Mantell for the first time. They learned of Dalton and how he is the leader of all this, but he's known as the Viper because he has a really deadly poison that he uses, one that is pretty much guaranteed to kill you if you are poisoned by it. And he has not revealed the origin of this poison or how to make it or anything, so he is kind of like the only one that knows how to use it. So he has a lot of fear mongering going on within the Shadow Collective, and the Shadow Collective to a degree respects him because he's gotten there from humble origins. He started in the Black Sun and worked his way up. Now, Dalton in the Star Wars universe does not exist, but I feel like there would be someone in charge of the Shadow Collective, but at this point, we don't know any of that story in The Force Awakens. So we're kind of having to flesh a lot of this out on our own. And I think that's part of the fun of having our game set in the new canon, is that you can kind of have a little bit of freedom there, because there's a good like 30 years where stuff was happening, but we don't know necessarily about all that stuff. We'll get to that in a minute, though. So Dalton is this character that I've set up. The players have met him before. They've met a lot of his lieutenants and the leaders of these other organizations that are part of the Shadow Collective, such as, the leader of the Death Watch. And all of these people pretty much have the same opinion of Dalton, that he's very powerful. They respect him, but he hasn't been himself lately. And they've been hearing that since they got onto Ord Mantell. And this has been several months. This has been since March of the earlier this year, and it's currently October. Like, they've been hearing about Dalton and how he's not quite himself, and people are questioning his ability to lead, and how recently he hasn't been on planet. He's been in Hutt space dealing with the Hutts, trying to get them to help fight against this thing called the First Order that Dalton is very aware of, but a lot of the rest of the galaxy is not at this point. There's a lot of people who don't know what the First Order is, and there's also a lot of people who believe that it is a made-up thing, made up by, extremists trying to take over the government. So at this point in the galaxy, there's not a lot of goodwill for Dalton going out and seeking allies against this First Order, who he believes is trying to kind of take over the galaxy, right? So that's kind of who Dalton is, where he's been, and the players have had dealings with him in the past. There was a point where the players were kind of sneaking around on Ord Mantell and putting their noses probably where they shouldn't have been, and Dalton basically covertly helped them out in several moments, and even had them come up into his office. And the players, they had gotten a note basically warning them of an event that was going to happen, but it was signed a friend, and they never really figured out who it was until they went into his office and saw some of his other handwriting and realized, oh gosh, that's totally Dalton. Like, he was the friend. So they knew him to be an ally, a tenuous ally, but one that could help them in the future. And then suddenly now they get this message that he is their bounty target. Now, the rest of the message goes on that he's actually arriving on Ord Mantell, and then basically a day after they get there, or 2 days after they get back to the planet, based on their current time frame, and that he's to be brought in alive. A lot of their bounties thus far have been dead or alive, but if they're brought in alive, they get more money. In this case, it is to be brought in alive. and he's wanted, Dalton that is, for killing multiple centrist and populist diplomatic parties in Hutt space. Now, this is really interesting if you've read the book Bloodline. If you haven't, I would highly suggest it. Bloodline is a book all about Princess Leia, or Senator Organa in this case, and how she starts the resistance. It takes place about 5 years before The Force Awakens, and it gives a lot of context for The Force Awakens. And I love this book. Six Pounder has been reading it. He also loves it. It gives a lot of context for The Force Awakens. Go get it. And if you don't have time to read a book, listen to the audio book. That's what I did. It was great. The narrator, she did a great job. So with that in mind, there is a lot of information we get out of that book, and I like to inject information about the world into our game because, one, it attaches the actions of the players into the world that we're a part of, which is that Force Awakens like timeline, and it also gives context to everything else going on. So there's kind of a cool little moment where if, you know, we're dealing with the centrists and stuff and the populists like we are, then what happens is the players will go read the book and be like, oh my gosh, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about these events from this book that tie into now our game. And that's what happened with Doc, with Six Pounder. I mentioned this and he gasps and he's like, oh my gosh, that's like everything I've been reading about in the book. I'm like, I did that for you because I knew you were reading it. Plus I did it to give our game timeline more validity, which is always really important when you're about to have an audience watching it. But basically, Dalton is wanted for killing centrist and populist diplomatic parties. The centrist and the populist are it's kind of like Republicans and Democrats in the US. It's like two political parties in the galaxy. One is kind of more about being more like the old empire and having a person kind of lead them forward. And the other is more about having the individual planets lead themselves. And it's this thing that we learn about in Bloodline. And it's a really kind of a weird political plot line throughout the entire thing. But what I did here is that apparently and allegedly, Dalton has killed several people from each party, and the New Republic has put out the bounty on his head. And there's also, he's wanted for conspiring against the New Republic. So that's kind of like, that goes hand in hand with that. And that the rest of the message goes on and that he's very dangerous, to be careful. And the player's like, we know that he's got that crazy poison that we don't want to deal with. And once again, that this is the semifinals of the Great Hunt. So there's a little bit more writing on this than usual. But then, and this is the fun thing, they get a second message, instantly pops up, starts playing because they're just going through their messages. And this message is from Dalton himself. So that's when things start getting interesting because Dalton now tells them that the Void Ghosts are in danger. This is the second time that he's warned them of this kind of thing. And he says that he has information to give them, but he can't do it right now. And he won't do it right now because he believes that these lines are potentially compromised and people are listening in on them. And he wants the players to meet with him on Ord Mantell when he gets back, and that he knows, or that the players know, where to find him and not to tell anybody. So now they have conflicting things. They're like, well, we need him for the bounty. We need him for the Great Hunt. But he obviously doesn't know that, and he has information that may save our lives. So there's this cool little conflict where the players are like arguing what they're going to do back and forth, but they know that they have a few days to talk about it, and they're on the ship. So that's what ends up happening. They end up getting back to Ord Mantell. The Saphira Hunters don't necessarily get the greatest welcome from the players on the ship. They kind of put them in the cargo hold and just leave them there. Yet when the Saphira Hunters leave, they check the cargo hold, and the cargo hold is actually in a better shape than it was when they were there in the first place. And that just speaks to the people that they are. They are very respectful of other people's property and other people's time, and they're very respectful of just the galaxy in general. They want to leave the galaxy a better place. It's kind of their motto. So that's kind of why they're taking out these like massive beasts that are causing like a lot of strife and issues within the galaxy and within settlements. So that's why they are big game hunters. That's what they do. But it's at this time that the players know that they're on a clock. They know when Dalton will be back on the planet, when they can go and either confront him or capture him or whatever. But they also have Cookie's father, and they're like, okay, well, we need to get him out of a coma. He's been in a coma this entire time. He's been in the back to tank. We can't get him out of this coma. So let's take him and try to get him cured. So they go to the only guy who knows medicine on the planet, really, which is this coroner that they've met earlier. And he was basically there when they were investigating the bodies that were showing up on Ord Mantell. And they bring Astimus, which is Cookie's father here, and they're like, help him. And he's like, I don't work on living patients, I can't do anything about this. And Ord Mantell at this point is kind of a crime-ridden planet. It's not necessarily a place known for its good medical care, but there are like places to find. And after spending a destiny point, a light side point, which is just, that's a game mechanic. We'll talk about that when we kind of get into the rules of the game. But what ends up happening is they use one of their contacts, a contact that they make up on the spot. And this was Alask's contact in the underworld of finding some kind of guy who is a medical professional on the planet. And they find a guy named One-Armed Jackson. So they go to his place, and it's really sketchy. Doesn't look necessarily like he is above board on a lot of his medicine practices. And they're able to kind of discern that this is a chop shop. And what I mean by that is it's a place where this guy takes living or dead people, harvests their organs, and sells them on the black market. Or also installs, maybe some illegal cybernetics and stuff like that. And this guy is a 3-armed basilisk. The basilisks are the race of people like, I don't remember his name, but the guy in the diner in episode 2 talking to Obi-Wan, that is a basilisk. They have like the 4 arms. They're really big. But this guy is named One-Armed Jackson, and he has 1 arm missing. That's why he's named that. So he only has 3 arms, but he is a big basilisk. And the players are a little hesitant about leaving Cookie's father here. They're like, he's probably just going to harvest his organs, which is a good assumption to make out of this dude. But they do get basically a guarantee that they can tap into the security feed and see like a camera on Cookie's father at all time. That's exactly what they do. It's suddenly they open up their data pad. Venator makes a good computers check, and now they're tapped in, so they can see like into this room at all times. And that, for whatever reason, gives them enough confidence to leave Cookie's father in this chop shop. And they end up leaving and moving on to go do some other things that they need to get done. Like they want to be prepared for this meeting in whatever way they possibly can. But they also go and confront Vex about the planet, and Vex, being their bounty hunter friend, they want to make sure that she kind of understands what's going on this planet, with all the murders and that being linked to the Great Hunt, and how the players believe the Great Hunt is being used by the First Order to bring these people in and kill them or use them or whatever's happening. And the response they get from Vex is that Vex is just really, she's a bounty hunter. She's not necessarily in this for morality or saving the galaxy. She's in this for the money, and that's her motivation for this. She's going to get a lot of money if they win. So the players kind of see this, understand it. They're like, oh, okay, well, I mean, I guess it makes sense. They're kind of in it for the money too. That's the only reason really they're still doing it, is if they win, they get notoriety, fame, and a lot of money. But at the same time, Alask is frustrated with her and is like, how can't you see that this is a really important thing? And she's like, I do see that it's a really important thing. I just don't care. I need the money. So they move on. They decide to go back to their apartment. They look for any bugs that might be in there. And I don't mean like creatures. I mean any listening devices in their little apartment that was given to them by Dalton. And they don't find anything at first, but they do end up finding one little listening device, and they are very clever about how they go with this. They end up making it so they plant false information. So they make a plan in front of this listening device that is a fake plan, and they try to root out whoever's been listening. So they go down into the slums where they basically put a fake idea in whoever's listening's head that they're going to be down there and that they're going to try to confront Dalton down there. But the problem is they don't know who's listening, so they end up sitting there for several hours in the slums waiting and waiting and waiting, and nothing happens, and they decide to just kind of give up. Like, whoever's listening isn't either coming or they're watching from a distance anyways, and it doesn't really matter, and they might be on to the players. But they aren't necessarily able to figure out who's listening, so they decide to basically go and investigate probably the most dangerous thing they could have at the time, which are these tunnels on Ord Mantell. And something that they've seen in the past, and something we've mentioned in story times, is they have followed people down alleyways before, and those people seemingly turn a corner and disappear. Players have no idea how they're doing it. Some kind of doorway that they're unable to open. But in going and preparing for a potential confrontation with Dalton, they decide to go up into Hightown where his office is, and two of the players, Alask and Venator, disguise themselves as construction workers, and they work their way into a building next door that has some renovations going on upstairs. So they work their way in, and they end up planting a bomb as a distraction in case they need it, which is nice and forward thinking. Now, I might want to point out that bomb, when Venator made it, didn't succeed on his check. It was all advantages. There was no success or failure. So he doesn't necessarily know if this bomb is ever going to work, but it is there, planted in this building and hidden very well. But then they decide to kind of check out the rest of the building, what's going on. There seems to be this renovation. They go upstairs and they find, after pretty much lying to one of the contractors, who they do a very good job of passing as construction workers, they make their way up to the top of this building and kind of into this nice suite that is being renovated. But there's like papers flying around and stuff because there's a breeze coming through. Part of the wall is knocked out and stuff. And a lot of the person's belongings that lived here once is still here. And they find, just a few like dissertations almost, as someone who was a professor that used to live here or still does and is just having things renovated. And what ends up happening is Alask picks up the paper, starts reading through it, and it's just a ton of nonsense information that he isn't necessarily able to decipher, but he does pretty much copy down the information, which is a huge research paper on it's kind of hard to explain, but it's magnetic resonating doors. And the paper goes on to explain this, and Alask, his eyes start glazing over as he starts reading through this and realize how boring it is, that there are these doors that this guy was working on, or rather an object, more like a wall that can magnetically resonate when presented with a very specific resonant frequency, which causes that piece of door or wall or whatever it is to suddenly act as if it wasn't there. You could still visually see it, but you could pass right through it as if nothing was there at all. And he's going through this like dissertation. He's like, this is all really boring. And what it ends up saying is that you need a correct kind of like key, a resonant key, in order to get through these things. And he wanted to mass produce these for defensive purposes for the Republic, and maybe as like using it as a defensive thing for a shield, where you can have an object like a bunker that has this technology, and if a bullet or a giant beam of like energy passed through it, it would just go straight through it if you set it up to work properly. So it's kind of like this technology this guy was trying to develop, but at the end of this paper, it just basically says that it was too expensive to produce on a mass quantity, and he kind of gave up. So the players are kind of looking around the rest of the apartment. They see evidence that a guy used to live here, maybe a few months ago or something, but there's like mold in the kitchen. The guy, it looks like he was just suddenly disappeared. And so now they're really interested because Venator and the rest of the party put it together like, wait, what if that is how these guys are getting into these secret passages that we know are there? We just can't get in. And it's like, oh, well, now we have to go find this key and see if that's the case. So they try to search for this guy, They go back down to the coroner's office after a long journey and realize that, oh, this guy died kind of recently, more like when the players first got to this planet, and they find some of his stuff that's still in the coroner's office because he's really creepy and he holds on to a lot of this stuff. Don't ask. This guy is he's quite the character, and they go through his stuff. They find just a metal rod that looks out of place, so they take it with him and they try it near one of these passages that the players know kind of where people have disappeared around. So they go there, and they're kind of, with the person with the key is standing fairly far away. So they're like, I don't understand how this works. And they're like trying to search around for a hole to put the key in. But by the time the person who's holding the rod gets close enough to the wall, someone just goes to hit the wall and they make a roll for it and they just go right through it and they pass right through it. And then the players realize, oh, we can just walk through. So they do that. They walk through and they go down a large set of stairs. It's just winding back and forth until finally it reaches a nearing bottom, and the darkness in here. There's only like very few lights leading these hallways that are twisting and turning, and they work their way through these passages, and it opens up into a catwalk that is on the top of this large room, and they slowly and quietly get on the catwalk and look down, and they're a few hundred feet in the air in this, it looks like a large bunker, and there's hundreds of people below them, and they're conversing and they're talking and they're in regular clothing. Some of them, which Alask is able to determine because he's a smuggler and kind of, see some of this stuff. Some of them have concealed weapons. Some of them are eating. Some of them are looking at maps of what look like the city. Some of them are talking to what look like leadership and stuff like that. And they're really freaked out about this. They're like, why are all these people here? And they instantly conclude they must be stormtroopers. We'll get to that eventually. But what ends up happening is they go across the catwalk and find what's kind of like a brig where there's a detention center, and they see a lot of guards on one end. They go down a different hallway, and there is a couple guards there, but they end up like leaving, and the players go down into this hall and see a couple interrogation rooms, and they open one of them up, and there's a man sitting in a chair with his head down. The players go up very slowly, and they try to wake this guy up before realizing, oh, he's like super dead. And it looks like he was tortured to death. And there are some signs of the way this guy died looks like the way that some of the bodies they found from the Great Hunt have died. And they kind of lift the guy's face up and they look at who it is. And it's a guy named Aaron who greeted them when they first got to this planet. He was kind of their contact here. And they refer to him as the bad spy because he has all these secrets about people on the planet, but he just like freely gave them away to the players because that's his character. He is technically a bad spy and he can't keep a secret, but people knew that about him. And suddenly they find his body. So they go to another one of the holding cells and they see blood like all over the place. Not enough to have someone die from bleeding out amount of blood, but there is a lot of blood here. And one of the players, with a successful perception check and investigating this place, find a necklace they've actually seen before. It is Iva Vizsla, the leader of the Death Watch. It's her necklace. Now, if you remember a while ago, before we started the Dathomir story on the story time, they went and told her that there are some crazy stuff going on underneath the city and that she needs to investigate it, but she didn't seem to care at all. Well, because of the players telling her that she needed to investigate it, she did on her own time and in her own way, but ends up getting captured by the people she is investigating because she wasn't quite aware of the entire threat. And I find that fascinating that the players can have that kind of profound effect on a very strong and important character, all simply because they want the help of that. And it wasn't something that I had planned, but it was something that had to go the way it did because they led her to this point, and they almost forced her to this point because of how persistent they were with telling her to investigate this. But they don't see her anywhere. They just see her necklace and a load of blood. And they follow the blood trail back out into the hallway, and it goes down towards the other detention center. There's little driplets of blood going down. So they're able to determine she might not be dead, but she might be super injured and tortured. And they kind of did this, yet they don't necessarily care about this character. You know, she is technically a bad guy. She's a leader of one of the organizations in the Shadow Collective. And she really just wanted power to begin with. So they're not necessarily jumping on saving her, but they don't feel like they necessarily should leave her behind either. But a patrol starts walking their way and they quickly escape out of the tunnels, only to get back up to the surface a little winded, a little exhausted. It's pretty late at night and they decide to go back to their manor that they have, the little house. And when they get there, a lot of them are really careful. Venator stays up all night because he's a droid. He doesn't sleep. So he kind of keeps a lookout, and they're all really hesitant at this point. And it's past this point that they're kind of getting to the region of Dalton showing back up. So they know that, you know, in the morning they need to be prepared for Dalton's arrival. So they get up, they plot, they plan, they make sure there's no listening devices in their place anymore. And they work their way up to Hightown to meet Dalton and confront him. They go inside of his office after, because it's fairly early in the morning, after talking to the secretary, who does not seem like a morning person and just kind of lets them through because they've been in and out recently, talking to all the members of the Shadow Collective. So to her, they seem cool, right? And she kind of knows them from the Great Hunt and they look kind of famous, so she lets them through. They get up into Dalton's office, break into it, and it basically, his office is like a lobby in the front, which has a huge meeting table. It's like a nice oak wood, table, which has a ton of chairs around it. And this, when they first got to Ord Mantell, they saw the meeting of the Shadow Collective happen here. They kind of overheard it as they were walking down the hall and saw a bit of it. And that's where they were technically introduced to all the leaders of the Shadow Collective, but were never actually like physically introduced to them. They just saw this happening and were moving on with whatever was happening at the time. But outside of this room is a double doorway that leads into his office, the places they've been before. And he has a really nice desk and a really nice, like, huge backed chair. There's a ton of like bookshelves on the back wall that all have data pads and stuff in them. And Venator is able to determine that those data pads probably have a lot of information or dirt on his enemies, but they're all really encoded, so he wouldn't necessarily be able to get into them. There's also like a nice little open bar in his office, and it's a pretty swanky place, but there's something that stands out to him, which stood out to him the first time they came in here, where there is a large metal door with a keypad next to it. And it looks like this door could probably take a blast from a starship and still survive. So whatever's in that door doesn't want to get out or shouldn't be let out. And the players are kind of sitting around waiting for Dalton to come. And Venator just gets anxious and just says, you know what, I'm gonna try to get into the door. What's it gonna hurt? What's it gonna hurt? And as a GM, I made sure that the difficulty on getting into that door was going to be difficult. When I came up with that door concept to begin with, when I first created their adventure on Ord Mantell, when they first arrived on the planet, because you really never know if they're just gonna go and explore this stuff right off the bat. You never know. When I came up with this door idea, I knew it was always going to be 5 red dice. Now, red dice are the hardest to roll against. They are a 12-sided dice, and there's a lot of failures on that dice, including despair. So to roll against 5 of them, even with a pretty good roll of your own, is going to be really difficult, probably never going to happen. And I meant that on purpose. But I did always want there to be the slight chance for them to be able to get into this door. And sure enough, just as a tip for all of you out there, all of you aspiring GMs, if you give the players a chance, expect them to potentially get that chance. Because sure enough, he rolls, and he successfully rolls and manages to open up the super secret bunker door that I was not expecting the players to ever get into, but I was prepared for the eventuality. So this door slides open, a slight smoke unleashes out a bit, and 2 of the players walk in to the room, and what they see is a protocol droid who turns around rapidly and is kind of disheveled, and is just like, oh, you guys aren't supposed to be here. Like, get get out. That's you. You're not. No, like you can't be in here. And they're kind of taken aback. They're like, what the hell? A protocol droid who is sitting over a sink. And then they start kind of looking around the room. They're like, there's a sink, there's cabinets. This is like a small kitchen. There's a ton of supplies. And they look down the room where it is just a square room, but it is divided by a prison cell on the other side of the room. And they go up to the prison wall, which is like a force wall. It's just like a blue glowing wall that they can see through. And they see the man that they know as Dalton in there on a bed. And he gets up and he looks straight in their eyes. And it's at this time that they hear someone walking in the office behind them. The players who are in the office are taken aback as what they see is Dalton walking into the office. The players in the room with the jail cell walk out, see this other Dalton, even though they see the one in the jail cell, and there's this awkward Mexican standoff of what the hell is happening right now. So Alask, sitting in the doorway of this, jail cell, looking out into the office where he can see the other Dalton come in, raises both of his guns, one on the jail cell, which it's a jail cell. I don't see why he's raising it. Look, it's what he did, and then raises his other gun on the Dalton walking in and just says, "Don't move." Like, what the heck is going on here? And the Dalton that walked in the room realizes they've gone into the door, puts the pieces together in his head, and then kind of puts a finger like up in the air to shush the players. And they're like, "Don't move. What's going on?" And he just says, just let me push this button real quick. You're in safe. And they don't want him to push any button. They don't want him to do anything. And he assures them, "You're going to be fine. Just shh, just stop talking." And before they can really react, Dalton reaches down to his belt and pushes a button, and like a small EMP bursts out from him and goes into the office. And the other players in the office see little like sparks just randomly in the room, like on the desk, and then like up behind a shelf, and then behind one of the statues in his room. And they realize, oh, there was a ton of listening devices, and whatever he just used disabled them. And then the Dalton that came into the office says, "I can explain everything. I see what's kind of going on here. You're just going to have to give me a chance." And then Alask is like, "You're not going anywhere. You just don't touch anything else. You need to explain to me what's going on." And then the Dalton kind of in the doorway, just suddenly he relaxes a bit, and he puts his shoulders down, and he looks a little bit more casual. And then he starts walking forward, and as Alask raises his gun, he takes a shot, and the bolt goes straight through Dalton as if it's a hologram. And then at the end of the room near the desk, two Daltons appear, and then one appears in the seat, and then the two that are on the side disappear, and the only one that is left is sitting in the seat. And Alask is just like, "What just happened?" And the Dalton that is now sitting in the seat says, "I will explain things, but you're going to have to promise not to freak out." Sure enough, there's a little bit of freaking out going on right now. The players are looking at a doppelganger in a jail cell, and then whoever this Dalton is that just walked in that has been communicating with him, because this Dalton in the jail cell is now that they're kind of like realizing it, looking like he's been in here a while. So who the hell is this guy? And then all of a sudden the form of this man goes down, and there is a woman now sitting in the chair. And she explains that her name is Nissa, and that this man that's in the jail cell is the real Dalton. And it's at this point that the players are like, "Should we kill her? Like, what do we do?" But she goes on and she says that when she was way younger, this man that they know as Dalton went and trained under her father, who is a Mandalorian. She herself is also a Mandalorian. And he was known for developing really toxic poisons. And Dalton trained under him, but being a really terrible guy, ended up killing her father, stealing the recipe for this poison and claiming it as his own, which is what caused him to rise to power in the Shadow Collective. And she, growing up, also knowing about all of her father's secrets because he taught her, knowing that she would eventually succeed him, but Dalton had no idea about her. She learned of all of this that happened after learning of her father's death and decided that one day she would have her vengeance. And that is exactly what's going on here. She decided 3 years ago to impersonate this man and take over his organization, and originally destroy this organization from within the inside and destroy all of the Shadow Collective, but later realized that that would just create a power vacuum in the kind of areas of the outer rim. And with that, more organizations would just pop up that are potentially worse. So she decided to try to manipulate it and do good with the Shadow Collective, such as going to Hutt space and convincing the Hutts to help her. But in all of this, they didn't realize, or she didn't realize, that the players were going to figure all of this out and now has to basically confess that everything, she's confessing that, yeah, she's been impersonating Dalton for 3 years. And ever since they got on the planet, they haven't been talking to him. They've been talking to her. And it's this really cool moment of like everything that the players have gone through on Ord Mantell in mention to Dalton, of him either being gone or missing or off in space somewhere working on negotiations with other criminal organizations, or everything where they're talking to these people and they're saying like, yeah, he just hasn't been the same, ever since a few years ago. We can't really put a finger on it, but things have been different. And she's successfully using a highly modified stealth pack, was able to impersonate him and project images of herself, which is how she's able to, create like all the mirror images and the smoke and mirrors going on. But her herself is probably stealthed nearby, unable to be seen or unable to be tracked, and using these images to keep herself safe just in case, because she's smart. She is really smart, and the players have figured this out. But she goes on to tell them that she was in Hutt space, and she realizes that the players were now have this bounty, as they tell her like, no, we have a bounty for Dalton. We thought that was you. We were going to take you in, and then suddenly we found this guy. So she explains like, well, why do I have a bounty? I was in Hutt space. I was negotiating all this, and I worked my way back because I needed to give you guys the information I found. And then the players say, well, you're wanted for taking out some political parties from the centrists and the other guys. I don't remember the centrists and the populace. That's it. The centrists and the populace. But she never did that. She never actually killed those people. So they're kind of piecing it together. Oh, she was set up. And she said that I've been investigating the New Republic in ways that I never thought I would. I heard about the death of a senator a while ago, and something sparked my imagination with that, in the fact that there were some leads out here in Ord Mantell that led me to believe that man was set up and was killed in basically in cold blood in order to take the fall, so some corrupted officials in the New Republic could remain hidden. And she's been piecing it together that those corrupted individuals are actually part of the First Order. And that's how they're kind of getting away with not being known in the galaxy at this time, is they're infiltrating organizations and doing it really smart. This isn't the empire of old. This is a new kind of empire. This is a strange and really dangerous empire. And she's been investigating that. And it's clear that she has been set up, or whoever had thought that this is Dalton was setting Dalton up for this fall. But the players at this point hadn't realized, and probably have now, since we've taken, a week since the last game, that the last time they heard of anyone wanting Dalton was when they were at the first party. And that's kind of where we started our story time. They were at this dinner party, and this general walked in, or a guy who kind of looked like a general, and he was addressed as General Oswin, and that's the last name of Dalton Oswin. So it's clear now that, like, oh, whoever this guy is obviously wanted Dalton in, whether to have him be the fall guy for whatever's happening here, or to simply just bring him in because it might be, related or something like that. We don't know. But the players are starting to put this together, and they decide over the course of, a long conversation in this room, this awkward room with this Mexican standoff. They tie up the old Dalton, the one in this jail cell, and are going to take him in, while this really strange, mysterious person named Nissa is going to kind of go and be in the shadows and try to help them out the best she can. And that's where we're going to end this story for now. We will have one more story time where we wrap up the events of this upcoming weekend, where we'll kind of prepare for an audience to actually start watching and participating in our game. And then with that in mind, we'll also kind of wrap up the end of our last session, because this was the end of a session. Then we played again. And then that session that we played was fairly short, and there wasn't a lot that happened. So we'll add that to this weekend's one. So then you guys will be caught up and you'll know what's happening in the story. But that little bombshell to throw on the players of this character who was impersonating another character this entire time, and that was just who she has been. That's who that character was, and is now caught up in all of this stuff happening on Ord Mantell, was kind of a cool bombshell to drop, because it almost felt like I was holding a sneeze, because I created that when I created all of Ord Mantell, because not all story has to be connected to what's going on in the big picture. This was just like a small little thing of that's who she was, that's her conflict, that's everything that she's been through thus far. How does that relate to the First Order and all that? Well, it probably doesn't, but it makes that whole thing more interesting, because now they have this character who has successfully infiltrated and impersonated a man for 3 years. So this is a powerful ally or a very powerful enemy that they're going to have to be very careful of. And I love that. I love that idea. I love that conflict that comes up of, do we trust her or do we not? And that's all I intended. And for that to finally be unveiled to the characters, it's just, it's really satisfying. And I would highly suggest, if you're a GM, to kind of come up with cool things like that you find interesting. But with that being said, again, we'll pick up in our game before this next weekend. So that way, when we do play and we do invite you guys to come and join us, that way you'll be caught up on the story and you'll just be jumping in from the get-go. So with all that being said, we shall see you guys next time.